The first thing Silas Boone saw was the stark, unnatural stillness of the woman, a statue of weariness against the churning, green-gold sea of his ripening wheat. She stood at the far edge of his field, where the road from the north dissolved into his land. A boy of about 7 clinging to her skirt. They were not moving. They were simply staring at the 2-story farmhouse with its wide, shaded porch as if it were a mirage that might vanish if they blinked. Silas lowered his wood plane, the long shaving of oak curling at his feet like a fallen ribbon. He'd been repairing the porch rail, the afternoon sun hot on the back of his neck, the smell of cut wood and dry earth filling his senses. A quiet, solitary life, hard won. Their intrusion wasn't an annoyance. It was a seismic shift in the quiet geology of his days. He knew why they had stopped. Everyone from the north stopped at the sight of the Boone place. It was the only outpost of order and prosperity for 20 miles in any direction, a green jewel set against the rugged, pine-studded hills of the Idaho Territory. It was also a monument to a tragedy everyone remembered but never spoke of to him. The woman, he noted, was not dressed for a long journey. Her charcoal gray dress was travel-stained and frayed at the hem, but it had once been well made. Her auburn hair, escaped from a once-knee bun, caught the sun like scattered pennies. The boy's face was pale beneath a coating of trail dust. They carried a single, battered carpet bag. Silas felt the old, familiar coldness settle in his gut. Strangers meant trouble, or pity, or worse, questions. He turned back to his work, hoping they'd move on. But when he glanced up minutes later, they were still there, only now they were walking, not towards the house, but skirting the edge of his field, following the creek line that marked his eastern boundary. Heading, it seemed, towards the old Thompson place, a collapsed wreck 5 miles down the valley. A sharper instinct, older than his desire for solitude, pricked at him. The Thompson place wasn't just derelict. It was dangerous. Well, shafts hidden by weeds, floorboards ready to give way. And the route along Dust Creek was all but forgotten, choked with willow and thorn. He wiped his hands on his trousers. He told himself his conscience wouldn't allow him to let a child wander into a death trap. It was neighborly duty, nothing more. Leaving his tools, he moved with the quiet, ground-eating stride of a man used to covering distance. He didn't call out. He simply followed, keeping to the higher ground, the wheat whispering against his legs. For an hour, he tracked them. He saw the woman stumble once, right herself with a hand on the boy's shoulder. He saw the boy point at a red-winged blackbird, his small face briefly animated. The woman's name came to him on the wind once, spoken by the boy in a tired voice. ELARA. He watched her ration water from a small canteen, giving the boy the lion's share. His mind, a fortress for so long, began to ask the questions he'd suppressed. Who was she? Running from something, clearly. To what? The Thompson shambles offered no refuge. Her posture spoke of education, a former grace eroded by hardship. She wasn't a farmer's wife. A widow? Possibly. But there was a flinty resilience in her movements that went beyond mere desperation. As the sun began to bleed into the western hills, painting the sky in violent oranges and purples, they reached the crumbling stone chimney that was all that remained upright of the Thompson homestead. The woman stood before it, her shoulders sinking. The sight of that defeat, silhouetted against the glorious sunset, struck Silas with a force that was almost physical. He stepped out from the cover of a cottonwood, his shadow long before him. It'll fall on you in the next stiff wind. She whirled, pulling the boy behind her in one fluid, protective motion. Her eyes, a startling sea green even from this distance, found his. They held no fear, only a weary defiance. The boy peeked out from behind her. "We mean no trouble," she said, her voice husky with dust and exhaustion, but clear. "We're just passing through." To where? Silas asked, stopping a respectful distance away. There's nothing but wilderness and wolf packs for 50 miles south. The north road is the only road. We're not going back north, she stated, and the finality in those words hung between them. Silas looked from her determined face to the boy's wide, apprehensive eyes. He saw the blisters on her hands gripping the carpet bag. He smelled the cold ashes of the long-dead Thompson fire. The debt he owed to no one, to a world that had taken everything from him, suddenly felt very specific and very heavy. "Night's coming," he said, the words rough in his throat. "You'll freeze out here, or the coyotes will bother you." The boy shouldn't see that. Elara's chin lifted. "We are not your charity, mister." "It's not charity," Silas replied, surprised at his own words. "It's a business proposition. I've got a roof. I've got a harvest coming in faster than one man can manage. You look like you can work. Your boy can fetch and carry. You work for your keep until you're ready to move on. No debts owed." The offer hung in the cooling air. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the struggle between monumental pride and the survival instinct of a mother. She looked down at her son, whose small hand was clenched in her skirt. "What's your name?" The boy asked suddenly, his voice a small bell in the vast quiet. "Silas," he said. "Silas Boone." The name meant nothing to the boy, but he saw the faintest tremor go through Elara. She'd heard the name. She knew the story. And in that moment, Silas knew nothing about them was simple coincidence. They hadn't just passed by his farm. They had arrived at it. "ELARA Vance," she said, surrendering only the name. "This is my son, Matty." She met his gaze again, the defiance now edged with a desperate deal-making. "We'll work. We'll earn our way. And we'll go when the time is right." Silas gave a single, slow nod. "The house is a long walk back. Best start now." He turned and began the trek home, not looking back, listening for the soft sounds of their footsteps following in the gathering dusk. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was thick with unspoken histories, a dangerous and fragile truce, and the first faint rustle of a storm yet to come. The Boone house was a museum of a life interrupted. Elara felt it the moment she crossed the threshold behind Silas, Matty's hand clutched tightly in hers. It was clean, orderly, but frozen in time. A woman's hairbrush still sat on a side table in the parlor, fine with dust. A faded, embroidered sampler on the wall read, "Bless this home," in careful script. The air smelled of beeswax, wood smoke, and the profound, melancholy scent of absence. Silas moved through it like a ghost haunting his own past. "Kitchen's there," he said, pointing to a doorway. "Pump's out back. There's a room at the top of the stairs. It's empty." He didn't meet her eyes. "I'll be in the barn." He left them then, a sack of flour, a side of bacon, and a clutch of potatoes on the kitchen table, his only further instruction. Elara's pride bristled at the implication that he wouldn't even sleep under the same roof, but her exhaustion was greater. She built a fire in the big iron stove, its warmth a profound relief. She fried bacon and made slapjacks, the first hot meal she and Matty had eaten in 3 days. The boy ate until he was drowsy, his eyes heavy. The upstairs room was indeed empty, save for a sturdy bed frame with a striped tick mattress and a washstand. It had been stripped of personality. As she tucked Matty into bed, he whispered, "He's sad, Mama." "Many people are sad, my love," she whispered back, smoothing his hair. "Now sleep." But she couldn't. She stood at the window, looking out at the moon-washed barn where a single square of golden light glowed from a loft window. Silas Boone. The name was a legend in the mining camps to the north, though she'd never connected it to this verdant valley. 5 years ago, the story went, a gang of claim jumpers, the brutal Daggett brothers, had targeted a solitary farmer. They'd come for his money, his stock. They'd found his wife, Abigail, alone. Silas had returned from a supply run to a house of horror. He'd buried his wife, then he'd vanished for 6 months. When he returned, he was alone. And the Daggett brothers were never heard from again. The law had asked no questions. Some debts, the territory understood, were paid in blood, not gold. And now she was in that man's house. A man capable of profound love and legendary violence. What had she walked into? The next morning, the work began. Silas was curt, efficient. He showed her how to judge the wheat for harvest, how to mend a harness, tasked Matty with gathering eggs and fetching water. He spoke only of the tasks at hand. ELARA worked with a fierce determination, her muscles screaming in protest, her soft hands tearing and bleeding. She would not give him cause to regret his offer, yet in the quiet moments she observed. She saw the way he carefully avoided the parlor as if its memories were physical traps. She saw the tenderness with which he treated his 2 draft horses, speaking to them in low murmurs. And one afternoon she found him at the small, fenced plot behind the house, not a garden, but a grave. A simple wooden marker read Abigail. He wasn't visiting. He was weeding it, his large, calloused hands moving with a heartbreaking gentleness among the wildflowers that had taken root. She retreated before he saw her, a lump in her own throat. A week in, the rhythm of work created a fragile bridge. Matty, starved for any male attention, began to shadow Silas, asking endless questions about the farm. Silas's answers were short, but he never told the boy to go away. One evening, ELARA, mending socks by the lamplight, heard Silas's low voice from the porch explaining the constellations to Matty. "That's the North Star, boy. No matter how lost you are, it can guide you home." Her heart ached. Home. A concept as distant as those stars. The first crack in their careful detachment came with the storm. It rolled over the mountains at twilight, a bruised purple monster spitting lightning. The harvest was half cut, the wheat vulnerable. Silas roared for them to help. They raced into the field as the first cold drops fell, pitching sheaves onto the wagon with frantic energy. The wind howled, lightning etched the sky, and rain fell in blinding sheets. In the chaos, Matty, trying to be helpful, slipped from the wagon side and landed hard on the muddy ground. ELARA's cry was lost in the thunder. But Silas was there. He swept the boy up, not to her, but into his own arms and ran for the barn, ELARA stumbling behind. Inside, in the sudden quiet punctuated by rain drumming on the roof, Silas laid Matty on a bed of clean straw. The boy's ankle was already swelling. "It's just a twist," Silas muttered, his hands surprisingly skilled as he probed the injury. He fashioned a cold compress from a feed sack and well water. Matty, white-faced, bit his lip to keep from crying. "You're being very brave," Silas said quietly, not looking at the boy but at his work. It was the kindest tone ELARA had heard him use. "Like you were brave?" Matty asked, impulsive. Silas's hand stilled. The air in the barn tightened. "What do you mean, boy?" "The men at the store in Silverton," Matty said, wincing as Silas tightened the compress. "They said you hunted down the bad men who hurt your wife. They said you're the toughest man in the territory." ELARA held her breath. Silas's face was granite in the lantern light. The ghosts were in the room with them now, given voice by her son. Finally Silas spoke, his voice a dry creek bed. "Being tough isn't about hunting, Matty. It's about bearing up. It's about putting one foot in front of the other when every part of you wants to lie down in the dust." He looked up then, and his gaze found ELARA's, soaked and shivering in the doorway. "It's about protecting what's yours, no matter the cost." The statement hung between them, a shared understanding. He knew she was running. He knew she was protecting Matty. He had not asked why, yet the storm passed. Matty's ankle was wrapped. The moment faded, but the seal on their silent pact had been broken. That night, as ELARA checked on her sleeping son, she looked out the window and saw Silas standing at the edge of his field, staring into the moon-washed darkness where the road from the north lay. Not with longing, but with watchfulness, as if he too was waiting for a storm yet to break. The harvest was in. Great golden stacks stood in the stubble field, monuments to their shared labor. A fragile, wordless trust had woven itself between ELARA, MATTY, and Silas. ELARA had begun to bake bread that filled the house with a yeasty warmth Silas had forgotten existed. MATTY's laugh, ringing out as he played with the barn kitten, was a sound that gradually chipped away at the perpetual winter in Silas's soul. One afternoon, while Silas was at the far pasture, a rider came up the northern road. He was a doorman in a town suit, his horse dusty. Jasper Klein, the territorial assessor. He needed to verify acreage for taxes. ELARA, feeling a surge of responsibility for the place that had sheltered them, offered him cool water from the spring house. Klein drank greedily, his eyes taking in the prosperous farm, then lingering on ELARA with a familiar, appraising male gaze that set her teeth on edge. Boone's done well for himself, especially considering. He didn't elaborate. And you are? A hired hand, ELARA said crisply, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. Hired hand, Klein repeated, a sly smile on his lips. Right. Well, tell Boone the paperwork will be at the land office in Bitterroot. He's got till the end of the month. He tipped his hat, but his eyes swept over her once more before he rode off. A cold dread pooled in ELARA's stomach. It wasn't Klein's lechery that frightened her. It was his connection to the world of records and laws, a world that could find you. When Silas returned, she told him of the visit, leaving out the assessor's demeanor. Silas just grunted, but she saw a new wariness in his eyes. That evening, after MATTY was asleep, he didn't retreat to the barn. He sat at the kitchen table, slowly drinking coffee. The silence was heavy, expectant. You're running from more than hard times, ELARA, he stated, his voice low. It wasn't a question. She stood at the sink, her back to him, watching the last light die on the mountains. The safety of the past weeks felt like a thin pane of glass. Aren't we all? My fight was with men who took what was mine, he said. Yours is different. It's in your eyes every time a stranger appears on that road. You're not just looking. You're bracing. The truth, so long held down, threatened to burst from her. She turned, leaning against the counter for support. His name is CORBIN TEAGUE. He's a cattle baron from Wyoming. My husband, MATTY's father, was his bookkeeper. He discovered things. Embezzlement, fraud on a grand scale. He was going to the authorities. Her voice hitched. He had an accident with a horse. A notoriously gentle horse. I found the ledger he'd hidden. I took MATTY and ran. Teague has man. He has reach. He wants that ledger back, and he wants us silent forever. She watched Silas absorb this. His face showed no surprise, only a deepening of its grave lines. Where's the ledger? Buried. 2 days' ride north of here, near a creek fork with a lightning-split pine. I couldn't carry it and care for MATTY. It's my only leverage, but I don't know how to use it. I'm trapped. Silas was silent for a long time. The assessor, Klein, he's a greedy little weasel. He files reports, sends telegrams. If he mentioned a woman and a boy on the Boone place, word could get to the wrong ears. The understanding passed between them. Their truce was over. They were now allies in a shared siege. 3 days later, the siege began. ELARA was in the vegetable garden when she saw them, 3 riders, moving with a purpose that was not friendly, emerging from the tree line to the north. They were big, hard-looking men. their clothes worn from travel, but their weapons clean and well kept. They didn't ride up to the house. They stopped at the edge of the property, scanning the layout like generals surveying a battlefield. One of them, a man with a thick black beard, raised a spyglass and trained it directly on her. Fear, ice cold and absolute, shot through her. She dropped her basket and ran for the house, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Silas!" she screamed, bursting into the barn where he was shoeing a horse. He was already moving, dropping the hoof pick and grabbing his rifle from its pegs. He didn't ask questions. He followed her to the window of the house's second floor, the one with the best view. The riders had not advanced. They were just watching. "Teague's men," ELARA whispered, her hands trembling. "They found us." Silas's jaw was a knot of granite. "They've found the place," he corrected, his voice deadly calm. "They're not sure yet. They're scouting. They'll wait for cover of dark." "We have to run," she said, panic clawing at her throat. "We can go out the back through the creek and be run down in open country with a child?" Silas cut her off, his eyes never leaving the riders. "No, this is the ground I know. This is the ground I've defended before." He looked at her then, and the look in his eyes was not that of a solitary farmer, but of the man who had hunted the Daggett brothers. "You get MATTY. You take him down to the root cellar. You bolt the door from the inside. You do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand? Silas, you can't fight 3 men alone." "I'm not alone," he said, a grim certainty in his voice. "I have a home to protect. Again. This time I won't be coming back to ashes." He turned from the window, his movements deliberate. He checked the load in his rifle, then took down a second, older weapon from above the mantel, a long, heavy Sharps buffalo gun. He handed her a small double-barreled Derringer. Its mother-of-pearl grip was cold in her hand. "For the absolute last resort," he said. "Now go." ELARA grabbed MATTY, who was wide-eyed with a fear he couldn't understand, and hurried him down into the dark, earthy-smelling cellar. As she slid the heavy bolt home, the last thing she saw was Silas Boone taking up a position by the parlor window, the fading light etching his profile in iron. He was not hiding. He was waiting. The sun dipped below the hills. Darkness pooled in the valley, thick and silent. The siege of the Boone farm had begun. The silence from the root cellar was absolute, a thick, cottony pressure in ELARA's ears. MATTY, bless him, had cried himself into an exhausted sleep on a pile of empty grain sacks. The Derringer was a cold, impossible weight in her hand. Above them, the house was a tomb. No footsteps, no creaking boards. Just the hum of the night through the dirt walls. Then, a new sound, the soft, rhythmic chink of a horse's bit from the direction of the barn. Not Silas's horses. They were locked in their stalls, quiet. This was from outside. The scouts were moving in. A minute later, a muffled curse and a thud, a man stumbling in the dark. Another voice, a harsh whisper. "Quiet, you fool." They were near the porch. ELARA's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw it all in her mind's eye. Silas at the window, a shadow among shadows, the long barrel of the Sharps resting on the sill. He would have the advantage of knowing every inch of the yard, every step of the porch. The crack of the Sharps was not a gunshot. It was a thunderclap inside a barrel, a sound of finality that shook dust from the cellar ceiling. It was followed instantly by a scream of pure agony from the yard. One of the hard, clean weapons she'd seen was now useless. The buffalo gun spoke a language of massive close-range damage that no pistol could answer. Chaos erupted above. Shouts, 2 more pistol shots wild, panicked splintering wood. Silas's rifle answered, its report sharper, more precise. Crack, a cry, cut short. Then a volley of return fire, glass shattering. They were shooting into the house. ELARA clutched Matty tighter, her tears falling silently onto his hair. She was imprisoning him in a grave to save his life, and a man she'd known mere weeks was fighting a war for them above. The gunfire ceased as suddenly as it began. A terrible, ringing silence descended, broken only by the frantic pounding of blood in her ears and the low, ragged moaning from the yard. One man at least was still alive out there. Then a new sound. Boots on the porch floorboards. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not Silas's tread. The moaning in the yard stopped with a sickening, guttural finality. A single close-range shot. The boots entered the house. She heard them in the kitchen, moving through the parlor, stepping over broken glass. They stopped directly above the cellar door. A voice called out, smooth as oiled leather, utterly cold. "Mrs. Vance, we know you're down there. Your protector is indisposed. Send up the boy and the ledger, and I'll consider making this quick for you. Corbin Teague." He'd come himself. Terror turned ELARA's limbs to water. Indisposed. The word echoed, a death sentence. Silas was gone. The thought unleashed a despair so profound it burned away the fear, leaving behind a white-hot coal of rage. She looked at Matty's sleeping face, at the derringer in her hand. 2 shots. One for Teague. One for her son, to spare him what would come after. Her finger found the trigger. Then, from directly above, a different sound. A low, wet gasp. The sound of a boot scuffing desperately against wood. A thud of a body falling. Teague's voice, now strained, shocked. "You?" No reply. Just another sound, the solid, meaty thunk of a knife finding its mark, then a heavy, collapsing slump. Silence. ELARA sat frozen, the derringer shaking violently. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then a slow, dragging sound above. Something heavy being moved. Footsteps, unsteady now, approached the cellar door. A key scraped in the lock was on the outside. The bolt slid back with a deafening screech in the quiet. The door opened upward. Lantern light, blinding after the total dark, flooded in. Silas Boone stood framed in the opening. He was a specter of war. Blood soaked the entire left side of his shirt from a grazing wound along his ribs. A deep cut bled freely above his eye, washing his cheek in crimson. In one hand he held his hunting knife, dark and wet. In the other he held the lantern, its light trembling slightly with the unsteadiness of his arm. His eyes found hers in the gloom. They were the eyes of a man who had just returned from a very dark place. But they were clear, alive. "It's done," he rasped, the words raw. "All of it." He helped her and a groggy Matty up out of the cellar. The kitchen was a shambles of broken crockery and splintered wood. In the doorway to the parlor lay Corbin Teague, sightless eyes staring at the ceiling, a look of profound surprise frozen on his face. The ledger, recovered from its hiding place by Silas in the days prior, lay on the table next to Abigail's hairbrush. Silas didn't let them linger. He led them outside, past the 2 other shapes in the yard, to the pump. He washed his face and hands, the water running pink, then helped ELARA clean Matty's tear-streaked face. The dawn was just a suggestion in the east, a pale smear of gray. "The law?" ELARA began, her voice a ghost of itself. "We'll see it as it is," Silas said, wincing as he pressed a clean rag to his side. A cattle baron and his hired guns, shot while attempting to murder a homesteader and his family. The ledger is proof of motive. Klein the assessor will be a witness to their presence. "It's over, ELARA." His family. The words hung in the cool dawn air. They buried the dead in a corner of the far pasture, marking no graves. It was ugly, necessary work. Silas's wounds were clean but needed stitching. ELARA did it by the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, her hands steady now. her tears falling freely for the man who had borne violence again to shield them. A week later, the land was quiet. Silas stood at Abigail's grave, not weeding, but speaking softly. ELARA watched from a distance, holding Matty's hand. She saw him place a single, perfect ear of harvested wheat on the stone. He walked back to them, his stride still stiff but purposeful. He looked at ELARA, then at Matty. "The debt I owed," he said slowly, "was to the living. I paid it to the wrong people for too long." He swallowed hard, his gaze moving from the burnt-out shell of his old life to the sturdy, scarred house to them. "This place? It's been a fortress. It could be a home again. If you wanted." ELARA looked at the man who was more than a legend, at the boy who looked up at him with unclouded eyes, at the land that had offered sanctuary and demanded blood in equal measure. The road north was closed. The road south was wilderness. Here, in this green gold valley, was a chance to build something new from the ashes of two broken pasts. She reached out and took his rough, scarred hand. It was warm and solid and real. "We want," she said, and for the first time since they'd arrived, Silas Boone smiled. It was a small, weathered thing, but it reached his eyes, melting the last of the winter within. The harvest was over. Now they would plant.